My name is Rebecca Hartman. At 27, I discovered what cuts deepest, that your own family can be the most ungrateful of all. I felt it most clearly that night in Aberdeen, when the table was set and the praise began to fall in the wrong direction. Claire, I don't know what we would have done without you. All those bills, your generosity has been our lifeline. My fork froze midway to my mouth. The air at the dinner table felt thick, heavy enough to choke on. My cousin Claire smiled politely, lowering her eyes as though she were embarrassed by the attention. She wasn't embarrassed, I knew that smile too well. It was her way of soaking in every drop of admiration without having to say a word. I stared at her, my stomach twisting. I had been the one sending $4,000 every month for nearly 3 years. I had rearranged my life in Milwaukee, cut back on dinners out, lived on instant noodles more often than I liked, even taken on extra freelance work just to keep the payments flowing. And yet, here I sat in my parents' dining room, listening to them raise their glasses to the wrong savior. Claire, darling, Dad said, his voice warm in a way I hadn't heard directed at me in years. You've carried us more than we deserve. You're an angel. Claire tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't deny it. She never did. A laugh bubbled from my brother across the table. See? That's why Claire's always been the star of this family. He winked at her, and the room erupted in little nods and murmurs of agreement. I felt heat crawling up my neck. My voice pressed against my throat, desperate to break out, but fear kept it lodged there. If I spoke, if I said the truth, would they even believe me? The memory of all the other times they'd brushed me off flashed through my mind like a cruel slideshow. No, they wouldn't. I stabbed at a piece of roast beef and chewed mechanically, my ears ringing as their praise poured over Claire. My chest tightened with every word. It wasn't just the money. It was everything that came with it, the late nights I spent balancing my budget, the careful planning so I wouldn't fall behind on rent, the hours of overtime at work when my body begged for rest. Each dollar carried a piece of me, a quiet devotion I thought might finally matter. But watching my family lift their glasses to Claire, I realized how invisible I truly was. My mother reached across the table and patted Claire's hand. You've saved us, sweetheart. You're the reason we can still keep this house. The words stabbed deeper than the knife in my hand ever could. I swallowed hard, tasting bitterness instead of food. For years I'd kept my secret, telling myself it didn't matter who got the credit. What mattered was that my parents were okay, that Dad had his insulin, that Mom could keep up with her therapy. But now, sitting there, I felt something crack inside me. Claire glanced at me once, her eyes flicking quickly before she looked away. That tiny glance said everything, she knew. She knew it wasn't her, but she wasn't going to stop them from believing it. Rebecca, my mother said suddenly, jolting me back. You didn't bring much for dessert, did you? Maybe next time. Her words were casual, dismissive, like a tap on the shoulder reminding me of my place. Not the savior. Not the angel. Just the afterthought. I forced a smile, but my lips felt wooden. Maybe next time, I whispered. The conversation drifted back to Claire, her supposed design clients, her future projects, her bright path ahead. I sat in silence, nodding occasionally, though my pulse hammered in my ears. I wanted to scream. To stand up and pound my fists against the table, to shout the truth until they had no choice but to see me. But I didn't. I stayed seated, my fingernails biting into the wood beneath the table. Because I knew the truth already, if I spoke, they'd accuse me of jealousy, of trying to steal Claire's glory. And in that moment, humiliation seemed worse than silence. As the plates were cleared and coffee poured, I made a decision. I would not say a word tonight. But inside, something had shifted. A seed of defiance had taken root, and though it was small, I knew it would grow. Claire could bask in their praise for now. Let her. The truth had a way of clawing to the surface, and when it did, none of them would be ready for it. For the first time in years, I felt something stronger than shame burning in my chest. It was anger. And anger, I realized, might finally set me free. When I say I learned invisibility young, people imagine a metaphor. It wasn't. It was a practical skill, like tying my shoes or zipping my coat. I learned where to stand so I wouldn't block a photo, how to clap on cue for other people's moments, how to swallow a story right before it reached my lips because someone else's story was louder. Mostly, I learned to carry praise meant for me to a quiet place inside and set it down where no one would trip over it. Claire moved 3 blocks away when we were 8. Her mother, my aunt, had a laugh like wind chimes and a talent for turning any afternoon into an occasion, lemonade in real glasses, paper lanterns, glitter that never truly left the carpet. Claire arrived with a suitcase full of tutus and a certainty about how the world should arrange itself. I brought a shoebox of rocks I was sure were fossils. If you could have stacked us like blocks, you would have seen it, Claire on top, sunlight gilding the edges, and me underneath, steadying the tower. At school, our teacher, Mrs. Baird, let us choose a class job. I picked board cleaner because I liked the way chalk dust made little galaxies in the air. Claire chose line leader. By recess she'd made the job permanent, and I learned you could do something perfectly, quietly, every day, and still be the kind of person no one remembered to thank. The first time I noticed the forgetting, I told myself it was an accident. The second time, I told myself it was training. My birthdays were always joint. It's easier, my mother would promise, smoothing a tablecloth over the dining table. Claire would blow out the candles, she had better lung power from ballet, and the room would sing to both of us, but the last notes curved toward her name. One year I wished for a microscope. I unwrapped a pink jewelry kit instead, Claire squealing that it matched her bracelet. I wrote a thank you note anyway and tried not to imagine the tiny worlds I wasn't going to see. Small slights teach you the bigger lessons. I learned to anticipate the pivot in a conversation, how a compliment from me would boomerang toward Claire. Great grade, Rebecca, my father would say, ruffling my hair, and then, did you hear Claire got chosen for the recital? The praise would drift across the space between us and settle on her shoulders like a shawl. I didn't chase after it. Running after what was already leaving felt undignified. The first time I won something public, 5th grade science fair, I built a model of a water filter using gravel, sand, and charcoal. Mrs. Baird wrote "elegant" on my comment card. I didn't fully know what elegant meant then, but I loved the shape of it. The gym smelled like sweat and varnish, parents milled with mugs of coffee. Claire's project was a poster titled, "The History of Point Shoes," ringed by photos of ballerinas she'd clipped from magazines. When the principal announced my name, my mother gasped a little, surprised, and then kissed Claire's forehead for consolation. On the car ride home, Claire sniffled and said the judges didn't understand art. My mother patted her knee. No one asked me how it felt to hold a ribbon. I don't blame Claire entirely. She never had to learn another way. The world, our small corner of it, showed her that being adored was normal, and she accepted the lesson the way a plant leans toward light. But there was a moment, there were dozens, when she could have tilted a sliver of that light in my direction and didn't. It's a kind of choice, not wicked, not saintly, just human. It still leaves a mark. In middle school, I found the library. It was always a few degrees cooler than the rest of the building, and the librarian, Mr. Kane, had a serene way of sliding books toward you like offerings. He taught me how to search the database. He taught me the long names of things. I learned to love instructions and diagrams, the way order could be coaxed out of chaos if you wrote the steps down. Claire loved stages and crowds, I loved tables of contents. We both memorized, we just memorized different kinds of music. Family gatherings were rehearsals for our roles. My aunt would arrive with a dessert that glittered, my mother would declare herself helpless without Claire's help. She has such taste, she'd say, positioning the centerpiece. If I brought anything, carefully baked brownies, a salad with ribbons of carrot, I'd hear, "Oh, you shouldn't have," which sounded like a compliment until I understood it was permission to ignore what I'd done. I learned to set things down and step back. Once, in 8th grade, I was accused of breaking a porcelain bird on my grandmother's mantel. Claire had been practicing a pirouette in socks and bumped the table. The bird fell, chipped, and spun like a wounded thing. Rebecca was dusting, Claire said, eyes wide. My mother's disappointment landed with the precision of a tap on a glass. You need to be careful, she said. I almost confessed for both of us, just to end the tension, but I didn't. I took the blame and glued the bird's wing back on. It never looked quite right again. I kept glancing at it afterward, half comforted that the break was visible. Not all damage hides. There were bright pockets, too. A math teacher who wrote, "Trust your work," in the margin of a test. A neighbor who asked me to water her plants because I seemed like someone who notices things. Those comments were pebbles in my pocket, weight I could lean into when the wind picked up. But bright pockets are not the same as shelter. Shelters have doors that close against weather. Our house had windows always open to Claire's breeze. By high school, Claire had a social orbit that would have needed a map. I had routines, early labs, late bus rides, part-time shifts at the grocery store where bar codes made sense in a way conversations didn't. When I brought home pay stubs and tucked the money into a jar labeled college, my father nodded, proud in the abstract, then changed the subject to Claire's audition. Pride that doesn't look up from the horizon is a distant star. It shines, but you can't warm your hands against it. On the night of prom, I worked a closing shift. The store hummed with fluorescent fatigue. Claire arrived near 10, dress shimmering, friends in tow. She hugged me in front of my manager, sweet as syrup. You're amazing for working, she said, as if I were volunteering for a charity instead of saving for a future she wouldn't have to worry about. After they left, I rang up Discounted Bread and told myself there are kinds of glitter you wash down the sink. If you asked me when I decided I would be useful instead of visible, I would point to no single moment. It was 1,000 teaspoons pouring into a jar until it overflowed and I mistook the spill for a river. I told myself usefulness was its own applause. I told myself it didn't matter who clapped as long as the work was done. Later, when I started sending money home, the story I told myself fit neatly inside that old lesson. I didn't need credit, I needed results. It's a dangerous story precisely because it sounds noble. Back then, I couldn't see how a childhood of being almost seen prepared me to become the perfect ghost benefactor. I had trained for it without knowing. Smile, step aside, fix the thing that's broken, make it look effortless, never check whether someone else could have helped. In the mirror, I watched my face learn to hold steady. In my chest, something small built muscle in silence. The night I left for college, I stood in my bedroom touching objects for the last time. The glued bird on the shelf, the ribbon from the science fair, a library card with the ink rubbed thin. Claire blew in, breathless from a party, and flopped on my bed. Call me if you need advice, she said, generous, shining. I promised I would and knew I wouldn't. There are questions that only quiet can answer. And I had already learned how to listen to it. By the time I reached college, I was already fluent in sacrifice. Most people my age were learning how to live on their own for the first time, testing the freedom of late nights and skipped classes. I knew none of that. What I knew was the rhythm of double shifts, the constant math of rent versus tuition versus how much I could skim off the top to send home without sinking myself. It started small. Freshman year, Dad called one night while I was studying in the library. His voice was rough, gravelly with embarrassment. We're short this month. Just a couple hundred. Your mom's hours got cut. I had maybe 300 in my account, money meant for books. Without thinking, I transferred 200. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a daughter's duty. But one-time things have a way of multiplying when silence is easier than saying no. By sophomore year, it became a pattern. I picked up tutoring shifts, sold plasma, even skipped meals to stretch my budget. I learned which cereal kept me full the longest, which library corners stayed open past midnight so I could finish freelance coding jobs for clients who paid in trickles. Each month I wired money home. Each month my parents thanked me in vague tones, as if the money had fallen from the sky. They never asked what it cost me. They never wanted to know. Claire's life, meanwhile, was a steady stream of Instagram perfect moments. She'd enrolled in a design program 2 states away and posted photos of studio spaces with high ceilings and her sketches spread across spotless desks. At Christmas, my mother showed me those photos on her phone as if Claire had painted the Sistine Chapel. When I mentioned my coding project, a health app I'd been building in between classes and work, she blinked and changed the subject. "You should be proud of Claire," she said. "She's going places." I nodded, biting the inside of my cheek. The strange thing was, I didn't resent the giving at first. There was a satisfaction in it, almost addictive, the knowledge that I could be the steady one, the one who kept the lights on back home, who made sure Dad had insulin and Mom could pay for her therapy. I told myself it was strength. But strength that's never seen starts to rot inside you. By junior year, the amounts grew larger. Medical bills piled up, the house needed repairs. I increased the transfers, quietly cutting corners in my own life. I stopped buying new clothes, patched old sneakers with glue, turned down invitations to dinner with classmates. The gap between what I gave and what I lived on widened until it swallowed everything. I carried it like an invisible backpack, straps digging deeper each month. No one outside my family knew. I kept my mouth shut when classmates joked about parental bailouts or when friends assumed I had extra cash from coding gigs. I didn't want pity. I wanted, though I'd never admit it, recognition. But recognition never came. At home, Claire was the hero. By then, my parents had started thanking her directly, though I didn't know how the lie began. Maybe they assumed. Maybe she let them. Maybe both. The first time I heard it, I nearly dropped the phone. "Claire's been so generous," Mom said, voice thick with pride. $4,000 a month. Can you believe it? She must be doing so well with her design clients. 4,000. The exact amount I'd been sending. My tongue felt heavy, my throat closing. "Mom, I started, then stopped." If I said it, if I claimed it, she wouldn't believe me. I could already hear the skepticism in her tone, the dismissal. I hung up soon after, lying awake half the night staring at the ceiling of my dorm room. Claire hadn't corrected them. She'd sat in the glow of their gratitude and let it wrap around her like a cloak. The betrayal was quiet but sharp. A needle slipped under the skin. After that, every transfer felt heavier. My paycheck hit my account, I calculated bills, and with shaking hands I set up the monthly wire. Watching the balance shrink left me nauseous. I lived on scraps while my cousin played the benefactor. She never called to thank me, never admitted she knew. Silence was her currency, and it bought her their devotion. I started writing about it in a journal, scrawling late at night in cramped handwriting. "You're keeping them alive, and no one knows. You're erasing yourself every month." The words filled pages, a secret ledger of sacrifice. One evening, after a 12-hour day split between classes and work, I opened my banking app and stared at the numbers. My rent was due in 3 days. My account balance could just barely cover it after the transfer. I pressed send anyway. My chest felt hollow, like I'd scooped myself out and mailed the pieces to Aberdeen. That night I dreamed I was carrying boxes up an endless staircase. Each time I reached a landing, more boxes appeared, stacked higher, heavier. At the top, I thought I saw my parents waving, but when I finally reached them, they were clapping for Claire, her arms full of ribbons. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing. The dream wasn't far from reality. By senior year, I wasn't just carrying weight. I was disappearing under it. And the worst part was that no one seemed to notice, or care, who was carrying it at all. The first time I heard Claire outright accept credit, it was Thanksgiving. The table was crowded with relatives, everyone's voices bouncing off each other in a symphony of half-heard jokes and the scrape of silverware. The smell of turkey clung to the air, but my stomach was tight, appetite gone before I sat down. I was balancing my plate when Aunt Susan leaned across to my mother. "You must be so proud," she said, her voice warm. "Claire told me she's been helping with the bills. Not every young woman has that kind of heart." My mother's eyes softened, her whole face glowing. "Oh, she's been a blessing. Truly. We don't know how we would have managed without her." I froze. My fork hovered over mashed potatoes. Claire didn't blink. She smiled, lowered her gaze just enough to look modest, and let the praise pour over her like warm honey. My chest burned. My name wasn't even part of the conversation. I wanted to speak up, to point out the absurdity. I wanted to tell them about the sleepless nights coding for freelance clients, about pawning old jewelry to cover rent, about skipping meals so the money could keep flowing. But I didn't. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth, cemented there by years of training. "Rebecca, pass the rolls," my father said absently, and that was the only acknowledgement I got all evening. It wasn't the money itself that hurt. It was the lie, the deliberate silence that turned my sacrifice into Claire's halo. Her hands were clean. Her bank account, as far as I knew, was drowning in credit card debt. But here she sat, praised as the savior of the family, while I sank deeper into invisibility. Later that night, after dishes were stacked and relatives had drifted home, I found Claire in the living room scrolling through her phone. The glow lit her face like a secret. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked quietly, my voice trembling. She looked up, feigning innocence. "Say anything about what?" "You know exactly what," I hissed. "They think it's you. The money. All of it. You let them believe it." She tilted her head, studying me as if I were a puzzle she didn't quite care to solve. "What difference does it make?" The words slapped harder than any hand could. What difference? The difference was years of my life siphoned away, my own joy shrinking so theirs could expand. "They're my parents," I whispered. "They should know it's me." Claire shrugged. "They're happy this way. Why ruin it?" She went back to her phone, dismissing me like an afterthought. I stood frozen, heart pounding, shame and rage twined so tightly I couldn't separate them. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I stared at the ceiling plaster with its faint cracks. My phone buzzed with a notification, my bank confirming the monthly transfer had cleared. $4,000 gone again. I held the phone against my chest and wondered if I was keeping them alive or slowly erasing myself. The lie grew bolder as months passed. At Christmas, Dad toasted Claire, his voice thick with gratitude. "To our girl, who's carried this family when we needed it most." Glasses clinked. Claire smiled. My name was not spoken. At Easter, my mother hugged her tightly. "You've got such a giving heart, Claire. We'll never forget what you've done for us." I stood a few feet away holding a plate of deviled eggs, my throat aching. I wanted to laugh, scream, something. Instead, I placed the plate on the table and slipped outside for air. The night sky was sharp with stars. I tilted my head back and whispered to the darkness, "It's me. It's always been me." But the stars gave no answer, only cold silence. By then, my journal entries had grown darker. I wrote about betrayal, about the danger of silence, about how a person can die in plain sight if no one acknowledges them. My handwriting grew messier, ink pressing harder into the pages. One entry read, "The money was never about pride. It was about love. But love without recognition feels like servitude. And servitude corrodes the soul." Another, "Claire is not just stealing credit. She's stealing my existence. Every time they thank her, a part of me disappears." I started pulling away from family gatherings, finding excuses to skip or leave early. Work deadlines, travel, exhaustion. Anything to avoid watching their praise funnel into the wrong hands. But distance didn't dull the sting, it sharpened it. The breaking point came when my parents called one evening. I was in my apartment, exhausted from a 14-hour day, ramen cooling on the counter. Mom's voice was light. "Rebecca, you should be more like Claire. She's so responsible, always thinking of family first." I nearly dropped the phone. Responsible. Thinking of family. I pressed my palm to my forehead, dizzy with disbelief. "Mom," I whispered, "you have no idea what I do for you." But she didn't hear me. Or maybe she chose not to. She launched into a story about Claire's latest design project, her voice filled with admiration. I ended the call early, sat in silence, and let the truth settle like lead. The lie wasn't just Claire's anymore. It belonged to all of them. And one day, I promised myself, I'd stop feeding it. The smell of roasted turkey should have been comforting, but that year it turned my stomach. Thanksgiving had always been noisy in our family, too many voices in too small a dining room, the clatter of dishes, the constant tug of conversation. But beneath it all, there had always been a thin wire of tension, humming and invisible. That year, the wire finally snapped. I arrived early, bringing 2 pumpkin pies I'd baked the night before. The crusts were uneven, but the filling had set beautifully. I hoped, in some small way, it might earn me a word of thanks. Instead, when I placed them on the counter, Mom frowned. "You didn't need to trouble yourself, Rebecca. Claire already brought dessert." I followed her gaze. On the table sat a tray of chocolate-dipped strawberries, glossy and perfect. Claire stood nearby, laughing with Seth, her dress the kind that belonged at a cocktail party, not a family dinner. My pies suddenly looked amateur, childish even. I smoothed my hands on my jeans, feeling the old familiar sting of invisibility. When we sat down to eat, Dad lifted his glass. A toast. To Claire. Without her, we wouldn't even be sitting in this house today. My fork clattered against my plate. The room hushed, all eyes turning toward him, then to her. Claire dipped her head, smiling modestly, playing the role of reluctant hero. I couldn't stop myself this time. My voice broke the silence, sharp and shaking. "That's not true." The words hung there, heavy. My chest heaved. "It's been me," I said. "I've been sending the money every month. $4,000. Not Claire." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The sound of the furnace kicking on filled the silence. Then Dad's face darkened. He slammed his palm on the table, rattling glasses. "Enough, Rebecca. Don't you dare try to steal her credit." Heat flared in my cheeks. My hands trembled on the tablecloth. "I'm not stealing anything. I can show you the bank statements. Every transfer came from my account. I've been cutting back, skipping meals, working overtime." Seth interrupted with a snort. "Oh, come on. Claire's the one with the design contracts. You're just bitter." I turned to Claire, desperate. Her eyes flicked toward mine for an instant, an acknowledgement, a chance for her to end the lie. But then she lowered her gaze, lips pressed together, letting the silence stand as agreement. The betrayal cut deeper than words. "Why would you lie about something like this?" Mom asked, her voice icy. "Claire's been supporting us for years. Everyone knows it." "I'm not lying," I whispered, my throat raw. "I've given everything to you. And you don't even see me." Dad shoved his chair back. "That's enough. Don't embarrass yourself further." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. They laughed and praised Claire while I sat in silence, humiliation burning through me like acid. I barely tasted the food, each bite heavy and tasteless. When dessert came, no one touched my pies. The strawberries vanished in minutes. Afterward, I gathered dishes mechanically, stacking plates and scraping leftovers into the trash. My parents chatted with Claire in the living room, their voices warm, their laughter sharp reminders that I was a stranger in my own family. I carried the last plate into the kitchen, leaned against the counter, and let the weight of it all crash over me. The years of sacrifice, the constant erasure, the hope that maybe one day they'd recognize me, it all shattered. That night, in my childhood bedroom, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. My fingers hovered over the screen, trembling. I canceled the recurring transfer. A message popped up, "Are you sure you want to stop this payment?" I clicked yes. Relief and grief collided in my chest. My parents would wake to unpaid bills, confusion, and maybe anger. But for once, I wouldn't be the invisible benefactor keeping them afloat. For once, I was choosing myself. As I packed my bag before dawn, the house was silent. I glanced once at the dining room, where the table still bore the faint stains of spilled wine and turkey grease. The room where I'd tried, failed, and finally broken. I closed the door softly behind me and walked into the cold morning air, each breath a reminder that I was free, terrified, aching, but free. The drive back to Milwaukee felt like slipping out of one skin and into another. The highway stretched dark and empty, the horizon a thin blade of gray. Each mile put more distance between me and Aberdeen, yet the weight of what had happened clung to me like smoke. I replayed the dinner over and over, the slam of Dad's fist, Seth's smirk, Mom's disbelief, Claire's silence. Each detail stabbed again, and still, beneath the hurt, something pulsed steady. I'd finally stopped. The cord was cut. Back in my apartment, I dropped my bag by the door and sat at the kitchen table. The hum of the fridge was the only sound. My laptop still glowed from the night before, the confirmation screen frozen like a witness, payment cancelled. I stared at it until the words blurred. For days, guilt pressed on me like a heavy coat. I imagined Dad counting pills, Mom checking the mailbox for overdue notices. I pictured them sitting at the same table where I had once eaten in silence, whispering about how Claire's generosity had dried up. Did they call her first, asking for help? Did she scramble to cover the lie? I tried not to imagine, but the images seeped in anyway. At work, I moved through tasks in a haze. My team congratulated me on solving a bug in the patient data system, but the praise slid past me, unreal. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the city hum beyond my window. Without the transfers, my bank account slowly grew heavier, but the freedom felt strange, almost guilty. Like breathing air after years underwater and wondering if it was allowed. One evening, Aaron from my office invited me out for coffee. I hesitated, then agreed. We sat in a quiet cafe, the hiss of the espresso machine in the background. He talked about code, deadlines, office gossip. Then he looked at me more closely. "You seem different," he said. "Like you've been carrying something heavy." The words nearly undid me. For weeks I had been suffocating in silence, the same silence that had followed me since childhood. I took a shaky breath. "I cut my family off," I said. "Financially, at least." They thought someone else was helping them, but it was me. And when I told the truth, they didn't believe me. Aaron didn't interrupt. He just listened, eyes steady, hands wrapped around his mug. When I finished, my throat raw, he nodded slowly. "You've been carrying them alone. It's okay to put yourself first." Something in me cracked, not painfully, but with relief. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that. Back home, I wrote in my journal again, this time without the frantic scrawl of desperation. The words felt clearer. I stopped. I chose me. They may never believe me, but I don't need them to anymore. The first Saturday after canceling the payments, I laced up my sneakers and ran along Lake Michigan. The wind bit at my face, the air sharp in my lungs. Each step pounded out a rhythm, mine, mine, mine. I wasn't running from Aberdeen, I was running into myself. But guilt still lingered. At the grocery store, I hesitated before buying fresh fruit, something I used to skip because it was too expensive. The small indulgence felt almost criminal. I stood in the aisle gripping the apples, whispering to myself, "It's okay. You can spend money on you now." Nights were the hardest. I kept expecting my phone to buzz, Mom's voice sharp on the other end. I imagined the arguments, the accusations. But the silence stretched on. No calls, no messages. Just absence, heavy and final. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, I stood on my balcony watching the water shift colors. The city skyline glowed faintly. I thought about all the years I had given, my money, my time, my very sense of self, just to keep them afloat. And how they had chosen to believe a lie rather than me. The ache was still there, but it no longer felt like chains. It felt like a scar, tender, but part of me. Cutting the cord didn't erase my family, or the pain, or the betrayal. But it gave me space to breathe. Space to imagine a life where my worth wasn't measured by invisible sacrifices. For the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like possibility. At first, the silence from Aberdeen felt like an echo, sharp but distant. Days stretched into weeks with no calls from Mom, no texts from Dad, no smug messages from Seth. I told myself it was better this way. If they weren't speaking to me, they couldn't wound me. But silence has a way of whispering its own stories, and soon I began to hear fragments, not from them, but from the world around them. It started with a Facebook post from a neighbor. I was scrolling one evening, half distracted, when I saw it: Claire's selling a gently used designer coffee table. A few days later, another listing appeared: her drafting desk. Then a vintage lamp she'd once bragged about finding at a boutique. The captions were clipped, almost desperate: downsizing, need the cash. My stomach tightened. Claire had always cultivated an image of effortless success. To see her selling off the pieces of that image was like watching a painting peel from its canvas. A week later, another post surfaced in an Aberdeen community group: anyone else here Claire's struggling with debt? The comments were blunt. Credit cards maxed. Loans unpaid. A boutique redesign project that had failed spectacularly. I sat at my desk staring at the screen, a hollow ache spreading in my chest. I didn't feel satisfaction, not exactly. But there was a strange weight in realizing that my absence had pulled the rug out from under her facade. For years she had worn my sacrifice like a crown. Without it, she was crumbling. The unraveling didn't stop with Claire. A colleague from work, who still had family in Aberdeen, mentioned offhand that my parents' house was on the market. I nearly dropped my coffee. That house, with its peeling shutters and stubborn rosebushes, had been our anchor. They're downsizing, she said casually. Medical bills, I think. Later that night, I found the listing online. 3-bedroom home, needs repairs, priced to sell. The photos were stark: bare rooms, furniture pushed against the walls, a kitchen that looked smaller than I remembered. I imagined Mom packing her blue plates into boxes, Dad sorting through tools in the garage with shaky hands. The image cut deep, sharper than I expected. Guilt pressed in, whispering, "This is because you stopped. They're paying the price now." But another voice answered, "No. They built their comfort on your silence. You're not the villain here." Still, I couldn't ignore the consequences. Dad had apparently taken a part-time job at a hardware store. A neighbor's post mentioned seeing him behind the counter, moving slower than his health allowed. Mom was rumored to be cutting back on groceries, skipping therapy sessions to save money. I sat in my apartment, the glow of Lake Michigan outside my window, and tried to steady my breathing. I hadn't wanted this, hadn't wanted them to suffer. I just wanted to be seen. And then there was Seth. Word reached me through a mutual acquaintance that he'd been embarrassed in Aberdeen. Apparently, when the bank contacted him about overdue bills, they provided records of the past transfers, the account number, my name attached to every payment. The evidence was undeniable. For years, he'd boasted about Claire being the family's savior. Now the truth was out, and people whispered about his arrogance, his blindness. His social media went quiet, his posts about family pride vanishing. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt strangely empty. Late one night, I opened my email and found a message from Claire. Just 4 words: "Can we talk?" See. I stared at it for a long time, my finger hovering over the reply button. No apology. No explanation. Just a vague request. A part of me longed to click yes, to hear her admit the truth, to finally be acknowledged. But another part, the stronger part, knew her silence at that Thanksgiving table had been a choice. She had let me burn while she absorbed the light. That wasn't something 4 words could undo. I archived the email, my chest tight but resolute, The cracks in the facade were showing, and the truth was out in ways I hadn't expected. But instead of pulling me back to them, it pushed me further into myself. I wasn't the ghost anymore. I was the one holding the story. And for once, I didn't need their version of it. The email sat in my inbox like a pebble in a shoe, small, almost nothing, and somehow impossible to ignore. Can we talk? C. 4 words, no apology, no subject line, sent at 2:11 a.m. I imagined Claire at her desk, the lamp throwing a perfect circle of light, her hands hovering over the keyboard as if sincerity might be a style choice. I archived it. Then I pulled it back out. Then I archived it again, as if hiding it could shrink its gravity. All day at work I kept reaching for it the way a tongue touches a broken tooth. My team was debugging a stubborn sync issue, code scrolled and built and failed, but I reread those words more than any log. Can we talk? It sounded like a bridge, or a trap. With Claire, bridges often led back to the same island where I disappeared. That night I opened a blank reply and let my fingers rest above the keys. What do you want to talk about? Delete. You knew it was me and you let them praise you. Delete. I'm not your backdrop anymore. I kept that one for a second, feeling a flicker of power, then deleted it too. Anything I wrote seemed to assume we shared a language for truth. We didn't. I closed the laptop and made tea. The kettle hissed, a small comfort. Steam curled past the window, and in the glass I saw my reflection layered over the city, my face steady, the skyline behind it unwavering. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed myself to keep the peace. If I answered now, what would I be feeding, the hunger for closure or the old machine that ground me down? On impulse I pulled my journal from the shelf and wrote a letter I didn't plan to send. Claire, you stood in rooms where I vanished. You watched them put a crown on your head that belonged to no one, and you chose to keep it. You didn't push the lie, but you watered it. You must think I left so I could hurt them. I left so I could stop hurting myself. If you want to talk, say the words you've never said, I knew. I'm sorry. Then tell me what you're willing to repair that isn't my job to fix. I set the pen down and exhaled. The page didn't answer, but it steadied me. Outside, a siren dopplered and faded. The city went on with or without my family's story of me. The next morning Aaron pinged, coffee? You look like you slept with your laptop open. I laughed despite myself and met him at the corner cafe. He listened while I described the email and how it felt like a door cracked just enough to make me cold. What would you want from a conversation with her? He asked. A time machine, I said. A single moment where she says, it wasn't me. He nodded. And if you don't get that? I looked at the lid of my cup, a crescent of foam drying along the edge. Then I'll have walked back into a fire I already escaped. He didn't tell me what to do. He never did. He only said, if you go with rules you write. If you don't, that's a rule too. Rules. The word loosened something in my chest. I spent that evening making a list, the way I used to map out features for a sprint. 1. I meet her in a public place. 2. 1 hour, timer on the table. 3. I will say no if blame is tossed into my lap. 4. I will leave if she calls it a misunderstanding. 5. I owe no immediate decision, no forgiveness, no performance. I slept better with the list beside my bed. In the morning, I didn't open the email. I went for a run. The lake was a sheet of hammered silver, the wind dark and clean in my lungs. I counted my steps in 4s. Somewhere between 60 and 80 I realized I didn't actually want to hear her voice yet, I wanted to hear mine. For years mine had been the faintest sound in any room. Now it felt like a baseline, simple and steady. That afternoon I drafted another reply. I'm willing to meet for 1 hour. If we meet, I need you to acknowledge that you accepted credit for support I provided. If you can't do that, there's nothing to talk about. I didn't send it. Not because it wasn't true, but because I caught myself bargaining with a version of her that didn't exist. The real Claire avoided hard edges. She liked stories she could smooth. I set an egg timer on my desk for 5 minutes and let memory spool. The porcelain bird with the glued wing. The science fair ribbon no one asked about. The Thanksgiving toast. My finger hovering over, cancel payment, and the sudden flood of air afterward. Each image clicked into sequence, a reel I could hold without flinching. The point wasn't to rewind, it was to learn my contours. Near dusk my phone buzzed with a second email from Claire. I think we started off wrong. I never meant to hurt you. No subject line again. No nouns that carried weight. I typed back before I could overthink, not answering isn't neutral. You knew. I stared at the sentence. It was the smallest truth I could offer without opening a door. I hit send. Minutes stretched. An hour. I watered the plants, fed the sourdough starter, took out the recycling. When her reply came, the subject read, please. The body, I'm sorry I didn't correct them. I panicked. I wanted them to see me for once. Can we meet? The apology was partial, qualified by panic, shaped like a plea for pity. But there it was, a sentence I thought I'd never see. My heart thudded. I went back to my rules and read them like a prayer. Public place. 1 hour. No blame in my lap. 1 hour, I wrote. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., Lakeshore Cafe. If you minimize this, I'll leave. She responded with a single word, okay. I arrived early and chose a small table near the window. The lake threw the afternoon sun into the room in bright squares. I set my phone timer for 60 minutes and wrapped my hands around a mug I hardly sipped. When Claire walked in, she carried the same poise I'd seen 100 times. She looked almost fragile in the daylight. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sitting. Her eyes flicked to the timer. That's fair. I said nothing. The silence pressed against us, a firm wall. She folded and unfolded her napkin, then finally opened her mouth. I knew, she said. I knew it wasn't me. I let them believe it because, her voice wavered, because I liked who I was in their eyes. I told myself it didn't hurt anyone. It hurt me, I said. My voice didn't shake. The steadiness surprised me with its kindness. She nodded, tears gathering but not falling. I'm sorry. The words were bare, no garnish. I'm sorry. I didn't rush in to soothe her, didn't reach for the old script where I made things easier. The timer ticked between us. I breathed. I looked at the lake. I looked back at the woman who had shone while I disappeared. Somewhere under my ribs, a door I hadn't known how to open swung quietly inward. I accept the apology, I said at last. But acceptance isn't repair. Repair is yours to figure out. She swallowed. What do you want me to do? I thought of all the ways I could answer. I chose the smallest, truest one. Stop pretending the story was different. The timer glowed 17:42. I stood. That's enough for today. Outside, the air was bright and cold. I felt the shape of myself more clearly than I had in years, not taller, not louder, just intact. Claire didn't follow me. The lake moved in its enormous patience, and for once I matched its pace. I walked home without rehearsing what I should have said. My voice had been the only one I needed to hear. The morning after I met Claire, I woke before my alarm and lay still, listening to the radiator tick. Something in me felt rearranged, nothing dramatic, just a subtle shift, like a bookshelf moved 2 inches so the room breathes better. I made coffee and read my rules from the night before as if they were vows. I didn't replay the conversation, I replayed my steadiness. For once the loudest part of the story was my voice. At lunch, I booked a therapy intake. The receptionist asked if I preferred mornings or afternoons. I said mornings, before the day could talk me out of it. The following Tuesday I sat across from Dr. Reyes in a sunlit room that smelled faintly of eucalyptus. She had a calm, precise way of listening that made me feel less like a case and more like a person with a complicated map. I keep mistaking erasure for kindness, I told her. When I'm quiet, everyone else is comfortable. When I speak, I feel disloyal. That sounds like a rule you didn't write, she said. Let's draft new ones. We practiced small sentences out loud, the kind that used to snag in my throat. No. That doesn't work for me. I'll think about it and get back to you. I hated how my cheeks warmed saying them, as if I were breaking windows. She smiled. You're not smashing anything. You're drawing a boundary. A boundary is the exact distance at which you can love yourself and the other person simultaneously. I left with homework, 3 lines I would not cross for anyone this week, and 1 kindness I owed myself. That night I bought berries without doing the math twice, and I sat on the floor to eat them slowly from the carton, tart and bright, juice staining my fingers like proof. Aaron noticed the change first. He pinged, game night? We need a ruthless Scrabble player. I almost said I was too tired, then remembered the new rule about saying yes to what fed me. His apartment was soft-lit and full of small, human noises, someone chopping cilantro, a playlist that knew when to stay out of the way. I laughed until my ribs hurt when Pixel 8 hit a triple-word score. No one performed generosity. No one kept a ledger. When I said I was leaving at 10, no one begged me to stay or called me selfish. I walked home through cool air feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, ordinary happiness. At work, a different muscle woke up. I scheduled a one-on-one with my manager, Elena, and brought a list, reduced server spend by 18%, led the patient sync redesign, mentored 2 junior engineers until they could deploy solo. My hands didn't shake. I want to discuss title and comp, I said. Here's the impact. Here's what I'm asking. Elena read, then looked up with a grin that felt like sunlight. You came prepared. Give me a week. A week later she slid a packet across the table, senior title, salary adjusted, equity bumped. You should have asked sooner, she added, not unkindly. I thought of all the years I'd waited for someone to read what I wasn't saying. I folded the packet and felt the quiet joy of a door opening because I pressed the handle. The old current still tugged. On a gray Thursday, an email from Claire arrived, subject line empty, body blunt, I told them. In writing. I said the money was yours. I'm sorry again. I know that's not enough. A screenshot followed, a family thread where her message sat like a lit match. Under it, a bubble from my mother, we'll discuss later. Then nothing. My father hadn't replied. Seth typed and stopped and typed and stopped, the dots felt like the whole history of us. I didn't answer Claire right away. Repair takes time, and I had rules now. That evening I brought the plants to the sink and watered until the soil went dark, each pot a small planet I was responsible for. Only after the water ran clear did I write back, thank you for telling the truth. The next steps are between you and them. I'm not the translator anymore. Dr. Reyes raised an eyebrow when I told her. How did it feel to let the message belong to its rightful audience? Like dropping a bag I wasn't meant to carry, I said. And hearing it hit the floor in a room I don't have to clean. We worked on the grief, too, the ache that flared in quiet hours. She didn't ask me to forgive on a schedule, or call my pain noble. She gave it a chair. Sit with it, she said. But don't feed it other people's lines. Saturdays acquired shape, a pottery class in a studio that always smelled faintly of rain. My bowls were lopsided, my mugs thick at the lip, but they held. The will taught a lesson I should have learned earlier: pressure without water warps the clay, force without softness ruins form. I kept a chipped cup for myself and wrote in glaze along the bottom, not broken. Remade. There were other small remakings. I started cooking more than one-pan meals, learned the names of the strangers at my bus stop, said yes to a volunteer shift teaching girls to code on Wednesdays. Watching a 12-year-old light up when her loop finally ran felt like writing a line back into my own childhood, the part where no one asked how it felt to hold a ribbon. After class, one of the girls slipped a note into my pocket. "Thank you for seeing me." I cried in the elevator, the private kind of crying that cleans rather than floods. On a Sunday afternoon, Elena called. "We're short a speaker for the Civic Tech Meetup. 10 minutes on your patient sync project, interoperability, trade-offs, the human stakes. Interested?" Old me would have said I wasn't ready. New me felt the familiar fear rise and decided it could ride in the passenger seat. "Yes," I said. "Send me the slot." The night of the talk, the room was a mix of hoodies and blazers, laptops and legal pads. I told the story of messy data and fragile humans, of building a system that didn't drop either. When the questions ended, a woman in the front row approached me. "I'm starting a nonprofit clinic," she said. "We need someone like you." I didn't promise anything. I asked for details. I liked that I could tell the difference. Claire texted once more that week, "If you ever want to try coffee again, I'm here." I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I put the message in a folder called Later and noticed that the folder wasn't heavy. One evening I stood by the window with the city spilling gold into the lake and realized my life fit me. Not perfectly, there were seams, but the fabric didn't chafe. I could feel the scar of what had happened, a thin, honest line across the center of me. It didn't throb. It told the truth. I had given more than I had, been believed less than I deserved, and still, I was here. Not waiting to be seen. Seeing myself. When I closed the curtains, the room kept its outline. The kettle clicked off. Somewhere down the hall, someone laughed, and the sound didn't hollow me out. I set a lopsided mug on the counter and filled it to the brim. It held. So did I. The night I realized the story had ended, I wasn't doing anything extraordinary. I wasn't at a conference or in therapy, not even on a date with Aaron, who by then had become a steady presence in my days. I was standing barefoot in my apartment, watering a plant that had nearly died months earlier when I was too hollow to remember it. The leaves now unfurled, glossy and green, reaching toward the window. I tipped the can until the soil darkened and thought, "This is me." I came back to life, too. Milwaukee shimmered outside, the skyline strung with light, Lake Michigan dark and patient beyond it. I pressed my palms against the glass and watched the city breathe. For years I had looked at Aberdeen as the only measure of who I was, daughter, cousin, sibling, the shadow in every family photo. But here, in the reflection, I saw only myself, tired but upright, scarred but steady. Claire had followed through. She told them in full, not just once but multiple times, and I heard secondhand from a mutual friend that Seth no longer argued the point. Even Dad had gone quiet on the subject. My mother's pride had curdled into silence, which in some ways hurt more than anger. Still, none of them called me. Not to apologize, not to ask for help, not to bridge the distance. The thread between us had frayed, snapped, and lay coiled on the floor where no one bent to pick it up. Reyes asked me once if I wanted reconciliation. I told her I wasn't sure the word fit. Reconciliation assumes something whole existed to begin with, I said. Maybe all I ever had was a script, and they kept rewriting my part until I was barely in it. She nodded thoughtfully and said, "Then perhaps the work is not to reconcile but to release." So I practiced releasing. I stopped checking community posts about Aberdeen. I deleted Zillow alerts from my parents' old house. I left Claire's occasional texts unopened, filed neatly into Later where they could no longer gnaw. Release didn't mean I stopped caring, it meant I refused to carry their refusal anymore. Aaron noticed the difference at work. "You walk lighter," he said one afternoon as we wrapped up a code review. "Like the weight's in the right places now." Aaron noticed too, though he phrased it differently. "You don't disappear in conversations anymore. You take up your chair." It struck me then that I'd spent half a lifetime trying to fold myself smaller, convinced my worth was measured by how invisible I could become while still holding everything up. And yet, in choosing to stop, in letting the facade collapse, I hadn't vanished. I had expanded. The scars remained. Sometimes, late at night, I still felt the sting of Dad's fist on the table, of Mom's sharp dismissal, of Claire's silence stretching across years. Sometimes I woke from dreams of carrying boxes up endless stairs. But the ache no longer owned me. It was simply part of the landscape of me, like the faint ridge across healed skin. Evidence that I had been cut, that I had survived. At pottery class, I glazed a bowl in deep cobalt, the rim uneven but beautiful. I etched a single line beneath it before firing, "I was here." When I pulled it from the kiln, the letters glowed faintly under the glaze, hidden unless you tilted the bowl toward light. It felt right, that my truth didn't need to scream anymore. It just needed to exist. When the promotion announcement finally went public at work, Elena stopped by my desk. "You've earned every bit of this," she said. The words landed without deflection, without comparison. I let them stay. That night I treated myself to dinner at a small restaurant by the lake. I ordered the good wine, the dish I used to deem too expensive, and I ate slowly, savoring each bite as if proving to myself I was allowed to live fully in my own life. Walking home, I passed a family gathered at a bus stop, a mother balancing grocery bags, a father holding a toddler, a teenager with headphones slung around her neck. They were laughing at something small, nothing extraordinary, just being together. I didn't feel envy, not anymore. I felt recognition, that families come in many shapes, and sometimes you build yours from fragments of kindness, from colleagues, from friends who save you a seat at game night, from partners who listen more than they speak. At home, I stepped onto the balcony. The wind tugged at my hair, and the city stretched out below like a promise. I thought of the girl I had been, the one who glued a porcelain bird back together, who worked double shifts to send money no one believed came from her, who whispered the truth to the stars. I wanted to tell her she was never invisible. She was carrying too much light for them to see properly. I traced the skyline with my eyes, the buildings like outstretched hands, and I placed my own story among them, not hidden, not denied. Just mine. I had lost a family. I had found myself. And in the balance of those two truths, I finally understood, the scar was not a mark of weakness but of survival. It was proof I had chosen myself, and I would keep choosing myself, again and again, for as long as I lived.